Okay, so a little backstory before I tell you this. I'm a 6'7" male in Australia. I'd like to think I'm a fairly tough and intimidating guy, but some of the shit that used to go on at the mall I used to work the night shift for still gives me goosebumps to this day. So the mall I worked for was very, very large. Probably the largest in my state, I'd say. And all the way up to about 8:30 p.m., it would still be quite busy. Only around 9:30 would we manage to usher all the stragglers out, and only at about 11 would all the business owners have left. My job was basically to patrol the mall and make sure there was no one sticking around after the doors were closed during the night. We didn't have guns or batons, only a can of mace that was very rarely used. There were multiple occasions where we would find would-be thieves hiding around, trying to break into shops after dark, but they were normally far outnumbered by the 4 to 5 of us on shift at a time, and they would usually be intimidated by me or some of the other imposing members of security. This one night, though, shit started getting really weird for me on the night shift. So I'd say it was about 2 o'clock, and I was standing in the middle of the empty food court, eating a sandwich. And this was the only part of the mall that had any light at nighttime, due to the skylight, so it was comfortable to eat there. While I was eating, though, I heard a dull scraping noise from the hallway leading off from the main food courts and to some of the toilets. It sounded like a piece of metal dragging across the floor. I was immediately put on edge, and I flicked on my torch without a moment of hesitation. I can remember creeping down the hallway, flashlight in hand, illuminating a good 6 or 7 meters in front of me. As I got closer and closer to the end of the hall, the noise became louder and louder, until I was at the end of the hallway, and there was the toilet doors to the left and to the right of me. I could tell the sound was coming from the female toilets, though. I gripped the handle and opened the door a tiny crack, and the noise was now very clear, and had me not scared, but confused. I yelled, "Hey, who's in there?" The noise quickly stopped, and I paused a moment, listening hard through the tiny crack of the door, and I swear to fucking God, I could hear breathing. Low, male breathing. I shut the door, still gripping the handle tightly, and flicked on my radio. "This is 1-3. I need help in food court bathrooms. I think someone's here." No response. This was really strange, and it put me further on edge. Policy was to always answer the radio, and now I was truly becoming quite alarmed. "This is 1-3. Does anyone copy?" Still no response. I can remember whispering to myself, "What the actual fuck?" I again opened the door a tiny crack. "Listen, mate," I said, sounding as intimidating as possible. "If you don't fucking come out with your hands up, you're gonna end up eating your teeth tonight. Do you want that?" I sat there at the door, quite honestly terrified at this point, but there was no response. In fact, now there was no noise at all. I yelled into the bathroom, "Okay, mate, I'm coming in. If you do anything stupid, it's not my fault you'll never walk again." I tried my hardest to sound scary, but my voice was quivering at this point. This whole situation made no sense at all. Why would someone be in the female bathrooms? What was that metal noise? What the fuck is even happening? I very slowly opened the door and scanned my flashlight slowly across the room. All the cubicles were open, which was weird, but other than that, the whole room was totally empty. I was totally shitting myself about now. I was definitely losing it. I walked into the center of the bathroom, closing the door behind me. Scared to the core, I let out a faint, "This is some horror movie shit. Come out." When I heard the long, whining squeak of the door behind me, I span around, basically crying at this point, and shone my torch on a fucking massive man, at least a head taller than me, or so it seemed in my state at the time. He was Caucasian, at least in his 40s, with matte gray hair all over his forehead. He was mid-opening the door, but he stopped dead still in the middle of his action. He just looked at me, smiling this guilty fucking smile, like a kid would make when he gets caught stealing biscuits or some shit like that. I'm not going to lie. I was so scared I froze. He lifted his finger up to his mouth, before swinging the door open all the way and sprinting out with what looked like some small metal box in his hand. Turns out, he was just behind the toilet door when I was opening it, and I totally missed him. I was so fucking close to him, and I didn't even fucking notice him. He could have killed me if he had a knife or something, and that thought still haunts me to this day. Later that night, my radio miraculously started working again, and I got right on to telling my coworkers about my story. They collectively went pale when I told them what happened. They all had similar stories, but none that were as much of a close shave as mine. I worked the night shift for another week after that before I quit. I'm not sticking around in a job like that. My story is definitely not poop your pants scary or anything like that, but it has left me shaken and very uneasy about working late shifts. Anyways, I had just finished my first year of university, and I had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts, until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee who would be covering 3 to 4 of these shifts a week. The next week, I was working my first night shift alone. The driver would be out all night looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would be just me. I wasn't uneasy working such a shift by myself, since I had worked at a 24-hour coffee shop and was used to midnight shifts. It was also a Wednesday or Thursday night, so it wouldn't be very busy. And the best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening outside. Plus, the bell above the door always alerted me to a new customer, so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I got too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave. Dave is about 6'3" and 300 pounds, plus he suffers from several health problems, one of which made his movements slow and painful. He definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness, or the type of person who would be able to defend themselves or others very easily. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 1:30 to 2 a.m., Dave gets a call to go pick up someone in a town 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night, while I headed into the office and continued playing my video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop. My mind froze. I could hear panting, and in the reflection of the window, I could see someone sitting in one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects the front room with the office. I glanced into the sitting area and nearly shit bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweaty, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found it more hilarious than frightening. A few moments passed, and I finally got up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first. I asked him again, and he looked up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on top of his head. I was shocked and immediately offered assistance to him. He replies with,
"I'm fine. I don't need no help. I just want to go home."
I asked him if he needed a cab, and if so, where he was going. He told me he lives about 20 minutes away and wants Dave to take him home. After that, shit started to get weird. I called over Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office and the guy wanted a ride. He told me he'd be another 10 minutes. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case this guy made any sudden movements. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front, where there are two great big bay windows that make it easy to see what's happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all, but he seemed really angry at something, so I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, people would be able to see it. So I walked out into the front room, and as I get closer to the gentleman, that's when I see it. He's not just bleeding from the head, but from the shoulder and knee. I ask him again if he's okay, and I offer to call an ambulance for him. Bad idea,
You don't need to be doing that.
he told me.
It ain't like I killed nobody, right? I never killed nobody. Don't go doing that. You don't need to call anyone. I just want to go home.
I'm sorry, I just noticed that you're bleeding pretty badly, and thought you'd maybe like someone to make sure you're okay, I replied.
I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He had what was coming to him. He shouldn't have said those things. But it ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call nobody. I just want to go home.
Okay, I tell him, but you're bleeding,
It ain't like I killed nobody.
he replied.
I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just need to go home. I didn't kill anyone.
Silence for a moment. He notices the phone clutched in my hand.
I fell down.
He blurted out. Pardon?
I fell.
He repeated.
That's why I'm bleeding. I fell. I didn't kill nobody.
He got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now all over the chair and floor. I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while, he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he hadn't killed anyone, and that I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually, Dave radios over that he's about 2 minutes away, and I breathe a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front, the man gets into the car, and they drive off. Now I'm worried for Dave, so I call the cops. I reported what happened, and they follow the taxicab to this guy's house, where they arrest him. Turns out this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out. Injured him with a sharp object, I assume a pocket knife or a needle, took off running, fell, and managed to find his way to the taxi office. During his time in the cab office, the police had been searching for him, so technically, no, he didn't kill anyone, but he did assault and attempt to kill someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name was Duke, and he had a history of violence. He also had a history of coming home drunk and cracking his wife's skull open from time to time. Whether he had planned to do this that night, I couldn't say, but I'm just glad that the guy ended up in the drunk tank for that night. His wife was unharmed, and the guy who got stabbed to death didn't die. At least, I assume he didn't, since I still see Duke every now and then, walking the streets with his glorious rat tail, which means that he didn't get arrested. This is a true story that happened to me years ago. I'm from Germany, and worked at an old people's home in a little German town at that time. The facility was in a rural area on the outskirts of town. One night, I had a night shift with a new coworker I had never worked with before. He was in his mid-50s, wearing little round glasses, and for some reason, seemed a little strange to me on first sight. There was always only 2 workers alone in the facility at night, and our jobs were to watch over the 100 rooms and their inhabitants on 3 floors and make controlled rounds throughout the facility. We weren't supposed to use the elevators for security reasons at night and had to use the stairway instead. I remember there was some pretty strange weather this night. It was stormy and wild outside when my shift started at about 10 p.m. At the time, most of the personnel was gone. Only one older nurse was in the station room on the 2nd floor, where we had our headquarters at night. She wasn't used to the newer PC programs, so it took her longer to finish her writing stuff. Me and my coworker started our first rounds through the house, using stairways which had heavy doors that we had to close slowly and carefully every time to avoid noise. Everything was quiet. Most of the old people were sleeping already, and after we checked all the rooms, we sat down in the 2nd floor station room and finished some paperwork. The old nurse was gone. All doors to the outside had been shut, and the house was completely quiet when we were sitting at the table. After 15 minutes of sitting in the quiet, suddenly a heavy door in the stairway was smashed. Hard. We looked at each other without saying anything, and immediately ran to the stairway. I ran up to the 3rd floor, and my workmate sprinted down to the ground floor. We saw nothing. Nobody. We even checked the stairway windows, and they were all closed. Someone must have been in the stairway then, we concluded. As we found nothing, we continued our tour, starting from the 3rd floor down to the ground floor. From there on, I couldn't stop thinking about who the hell would sneak around the floors in the middle of the night. It was about 2 a.m. when we had to change the double sheets from an old invalid man who had pissed in his bed. I stood in the corner of the room beside the bed, backed up against the wall. My coworker was on the other side of the bed. I remember watching the door, waiting for someone to peer into the room. While I was concentrating on the door and lost in my thoughts, suddenly my coworker freaked out, screaming at the old man out of nothing, ripping the sheets and tossing the man around. His face got an angry, creepy look, and I was totally shocked and not able to say or do anything. I just watched this creepy guy in front of me, with the totally black windows behind him, and the doors leading to the dark floors where some freak had peeked around unseen. I stood there, pressed on the wall in the corner of the room, and felt totally lost, surrounded by psychopaths. We finally reached the ground floor, and everything was quiet. Only the wind was blowing around the house. Suddenly, we heard a dropping sound, like someone had dropped a knife or something metallic. The sound came from the kitchen area. We run to the closed glass door where the sound came from. It's a long dark hallway, with a back door leading to the trash cans and parking lot at the end. We opened that door and searched every single room. I felt extremely uncomfortable and expected an attack at every moment. But again, we found nothing. Some hours later, we started our last tour for the night. We split up this time, and I checked the rooms like usual. When I looked in one room, an old lady was awake and sat on her bed. She asked me if I was in her room 5 minutes ago. I told her no, and that we had just started the tour. She told me that 5 minutes ago, she'd clearly heard someone enter her room. She'd asked who was there, but never got an answer back, and then the door was just closed again. I got a creepy feeling while listening to the old lady. I told her to push the alarm button next time something like this happened again. I think it's unnecessary at this point to say how I felt for the next few hours of the night every time I entered a room or walked around a corner. I expected some stranger to be standing there the whole time, and I was more than glad when the damn shift was over. Some days later, I met the old nurse who left the facility late at night and told her the story. She told me that the back door to the kitchen area was wide open when she went to her car that night and left us. She reached the open dark back door from the parking lot and called out to see if anyone was there. Suddenly, she got a very bad feeling and turned around to run to her car and drove off as fast as she could. She was totally scared and tried to reach out and warn us, but couldn't find the number. I told her that the back door was definitely closed when we checked the area that night. We never found out who snuck around there at night, and many nights afterwards, our shift workers reported similar experiences for the following month. The coworker I had to work with that night was fired after more and more complaints about him emerged over time. Anyway, I'm glad I don't have to work there anymore, and I will never take any night shift myself again. What's up, guys? Blue Spooky here. I just wanted to thank you guys for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end. Sorry if my voice sounds a little different, or if you notice anything weird about the vocals in this episode. I'm a little bit sick right now, so I wanted to get a video out for you guys, so I tried to make it sound as normal and bearable as possible. Apologies for that. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a like. If you have any stories that you'd like me to read, or any personal stories that you'd like to send in, all of the links to my social media will be in the description below. That is my email, Facebook, and Twitter. Please feel free to send me a message on any of them, and I'll try to respond as quickly as I possibly can. If you have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel, and any feedback is greatly appreciated. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.